Hi everyone. Yeah, today I actually had plans to go to a local park that has an aquatic garden and is currently having a water lily and lotus show or exhibition, and those plans got canceled for various reasons. Actually got rescheduled for next weekend, so I had a little bit of time, so I thought I would respond to the Booktube slow read tag. I was tagged for this endeavor by Curtis Books and Films, and Curtis Books and Films is a relatively new, at least to me, channel that has some really good content so far, and also I think really the interesting thing will be he is planning on also discussing films, and I think there's such a rich communication, between books and films that I'm really looking forward to hearing more from him on his channel. So I'll put a link down to Curtis Books and Films down below. This tag was originally created by Neil Griffiths. If you're not familiar with his channel, he's sort of a great source for all things literary. Champion of small presses, reads a lot of contemporary literary fiction. He's a writer, has a book coming out this fall, so his channel is just really a wealth of content there as well. I'll put a link to his channel too down below. So let's get started. Kind of the philosophy of this tag. I went back and listened to Neil Griffith's original tag and for the philosophy of that, and it's really to, according to him, and go listen to the original one, which I will link to, he thinks that there's a lot of books that are read, seems to be read, fairly quickly, and some novels really just are more conducive to a longer read or to take a slower amount of time. Maybe he suggests, creating a space around the reading to reflect more, to just allow more time for the work to really work its magic. And this has been my experience as well. I studied history in college, and so during my college years I did not take the classes in literature and things that I kind of wish I had now. But at the time, I was really immersed in history, and so I read nonfiction. I was in this phase where fiction to me was a waste of my time. So I really read exclusively nonfiction, mostly history, for quite a number of years. And then it, occurred to me that I really was behind on reading classics and things like that. I started sort of trying to catch up on that, and then I realized how much I had to read and how much I didn't know, and then new nonfiction coming out all the time, so it seemed like there was always a race to get to the next book, and still is to a degree, but sometimes it really has benefited me to either read a work slowly or to go back and, once I finish the book, then realize I need to take more time with this book and then go back and reread it again in a slower way. So let's get to my 5. I debated on how to start the video. Should I start with the one that probably will cause people to roll their eyes, or save that one till last? I decided to go ahead and start with the one that might cause a few eye rolls, and that is Middlemarch by George Eliot. This novel, it seems like this novel, when I mention how much I love this novel, sometimes it gets eye rolls, because I think a lot of people studied this novel in college. Like I said, I did not. So I decided one summer a few years ago, I decided to read. Well, one summer I read I read French and Russian 19th century works, and then the following that, I went into 19th century British stuff. I read almost all of Charles Dickens, for example, and I read all these kind of like back to back. And when I got to Middlemarch, I read it, and when I finished it, I almost immediately thought, wow, that was really, really affected me. But I realized that I had not experienced that book the way I could. And so I actually went back and eventually readdressed it, reread it again, took my time, really let myself get immersed in that time and place and this character, Dorothea. And I just really connected with it so deeply with my own experience as a 20th, 21st century person, kind of who grew up kind of in a similar way, in a similar place, where, you know, really sort of, I guess, struggling to connect with other things outside of, you know, maybe my immediate surroundings, like the characters in that novel did. So that really benefited from a slower, deeper second read for me. So that's my first one. My next one I'll talk about is Magister Ludi by Hermann Hesse. This is sometimes published as the bead game or even the glass bead game. So if you're not familiar with this work, Hermann Hesse won the Nobel Prize for Literature back in, I think, 1946. This is considered one of his major works. I read this the first time. Story. I was living in New York. The thing about New York is it's, you know, so densely populated. You can be out walking, especially on recycle day, and see whole cartons of books that people are recycling. So what I would do sometimes is I would rescue those from recycling, because there was a thrift store a couple of blocks from where I lived, and I would take the books that were being put out for recycling and take them down to the thrift store, you know, for resale to benefit that charity. And in that process, sometimes I would come across books. I read a lot I was reading a lot during that time, and I read Magister Ludi. I had some problems with it. I didn't get it really at all, and just it went kind of over my head. And then last year I read Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse and really got into it. You know, I really got a lot from it. And so I thought maybe I should go and take Magister Ludi at a slower pace. I did a video on this too, by the way, which I'll link to below. But I did a video chat on this book chat. And so I really did. When I reread this again very carefully, then I finally understood what he was, I understood for me what he was trying to say about society and information and knowledge being fragmented, and this bead game. You know, I finally understood the concepts of the bead game, I think. So that one is a book, I even say in the book chat that I did last year for this work that, you know, it's a book that cannot be read quickly from my standpoint. So number 3, I'm going to say is Stoner by John Williams. I read this work last year as well and did a book chat on it. This work was written in like 1965 by this author, John Williams, who the book was not a success. It was published in the U.S. It was not a success, and it immediately went out of print, only to be rediscovered in the beginning of the 21st century and got picked up by a press, and then got a little more press. I think it maybe won an award in 2013 or something in Great Britain. I'm not sure about that. So this is just from memory. But I wasn't sure about it, because when you read about this book, it looks like it's going to be a sort of ordinary book. It's really the tale of an ordinary man's life, from sort of his beginnings in this rural, hardscrabble, unintellectual family in the Midwest of the U.S. He goes to college. He discovers literature. He lives this life full of life. You know, he gets married and has an academic life, sort of alienating himself from his, you know, background and his family. Is kind of heartbreaking in places. But ultimately he lives kind of a lonely life. The book is so atmospheric. If you read the description and you think, oh, this sounds like an ordinary kind of, what could be special about this book? I don't know what makes it special, because I'm not that well versed into how books are constructed, but just something about it. I really just slowed down and absorbed myself in it. It's got one of the best death scenes ever written, I think, in it. So definitely a book to take your time with and to just let it work its magic on you. So the next work I'm going to mention is Hardboiled, Wonderland and the End of the World by Haruki Murakami. I originally read this work, and I read it really quickly. And then I realized I had not really. I enjoyed it even the first time through, but I realized something in the back of my mind kept saying, you didn't quite get that. And what happened was my dad ultimately got metastatic prostate cancer and was in hospice, and I was spending taking care of him. He was still living in. He had a little small apartment. I went down there where he was living and stayed with him for his last month, and I decided at that point to reread Hardboiled, Wonderland, and the End of the World, and I read that very slowly and really got absorbed into it. Then I really could get it, and it turned out to be very appropriate for the setting, for the time period that I reread it in. It concerns consciousness and unconsciousness. This one character is both his consciousness and his unconsciousness. Hardboiled Wonderland is sort of his conscious state, and the End of the World is his unconscious state. One chapter deals with Hardboiled Wonderland, the other is the End of the World. It's so dreamlike, it's so atmospheric, it's so allegorical and metaphorical. It just is conducive to, if you're going to read that work. Not all Murakami's like this, in my opinion. I've read some of his other works that aren't quite this way, but this one really needs to have space to let you inhabit both that conscious and unconscious world, and for you to be able to, I think, make sense in it. That was my experience. So the last. Oh, those are all my books. Oh, no, one more. My last book is, really, of all of these, probably my favorite book, The Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa. Oh, my goodness. Fernando Pessoa, if you're not familiar with him, is an extremely interesting writer who lived and wrote in the early part of the 20th century in Lisbon, Portugal. He died, I think, in 1935. He had multiple selves he called them heteronyms, that were other aspects of himself. Many of them were writers, like 4 or 5 of them were poets. This book, The Book of Disquiet by Fernando Pessoa was... The Book of Disquiet actually was written by one of his heteronyms called Bernardo Soares, and Bernardo Soares is kind of an accounting clerk, low-level accounting clerk, who this book kind of reads like an autobiography, or not so much an autobiography as it is a diary. It's really an ode to an introvert. Beautiful writing. I had to stop periodically just because I would become so engrossed in just a paragraph that I would have to stop and reflect on that paragraph. And so it took me a while to get through this book, but that's a good thing. I do want to reread this again, though, in the future, and give it another really good long read, because it's so good. I don't know what else to say about it. I did a book chat on this. It was one of my first book chats, so it's not a good one of my book chat. It was really a rambling one, but I will link to it below. So, I think that I will leave it at that. I'm going to tag a few people. I'm going to tag BiblioAtlas. BiblioAtlas is sort of my soul sibling with reading. She's a very eclectic reader. I really enjoy her videos. I'll put a link to her channel below. I'm also going to tag Knowledge Lost, whose channel I just recently discovered. Another person who has a really good reading list. I really enjoy his discussion of his books. He is a real thoughtful reader and deliberate reader, and I really appreciate that. So I'll tag him. And then thirdly, I'll tag Richardson Reads. Richardson Reads is another new booktuber. So he's right now been doing a lot of bookshelf tours. He's got a huge book collection. And so I'm real interested to see maybe what his responses would be to this tag as well. So I'll close with that. Until next time, take care. Bye.